All right, here we go with episode 91 of Return to Authenticity, and this week's guest, Michael Jaquith. This was a fun conversation and one that I really had to work hard to stay at pace with my guest. Michael is very, very smart. He is a super brain, right? He has his chemistry PhD from Cornell. So really, really bright guy, and yet a quirky, nerdy guy as well. And we had a fun conversation. He talks about his life in as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, and then how he moved from that to what he felt was a higher calling to be a life coach and help others optimize their lives, and took a faith-based approach to doing so, which is really near and dear to my heart as I lean more and more into my faith and being more faith forward. So we had a fun conversation and really chopped it up. So I think you're really going to enjoy this show. And so I invite you to sit back and enjoy episode 91 and this week's guest, Michael Jaquith. Welcome to the Return to Authenticity podcast, where we hear inspiring and courageous stories of people who made bold pivots in their lives toward their more authentic selves, that version of themselves they were born to be or they had to find after life threw them a major curveball. I'm your host, Eric Sardina. Welcome and stand by. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is Michael Jaquith. After getting his chemistry PhD from Cornell, Michael spent almost 10 years in the corporate world. He eventually left that world behind to pursue a path of entrepreneurship, and along with his wife, he's owned 3 successful businesses. Michael then moved on to become a life coach to help others optimize their family lives, their marriages, and their business relationships by taking a faith-based approach to self-improvement. I'm excited to have Michael on the show today to share his story of how he helps men by combining analytical science, psychology, and the time-honored teachings of the faith to discover how to get more of what they want and live the promise of an abundant life. And with that, Michael Jaquith, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Eric. I am delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to this, and I look forward to our friendship growing as well.
Likewise, my friend. We had the opportunity to get introduced. We're actually both using a tool that helps podcasters and podcast guests get together. But I think we got introduced by our good friend Aaron Guyette, and so right. Always thankful to Aaron when he connects up good people together. So appreciate that referral, and we had the blessing of being able to be on your show just recently, and so excited about that, and excited to now chop it up and hear about your life, my friend.
The tables are turned.
Right on. Absolutely. So with that, let's talk about childhood. Growing up, where'd you grow up? What was your family life like?
So I had a rough beginning. It gets a little dark in some spots, so brace yourself. So I was raised in northern Michigan. You know, I live now in northern Idaho, and people around here, when we moved here, they're like, get ready for the snow. Are you ready for snow? I'm like, oh, dude, you guys have no idea. I know snow. We would have like 2 inches of snow in a winter was nothing up there. And it's a pretty poor family. To put some context here, my dad was not very mature, to put it politely, when they found out that my mother was pregnant out of wedlock. And so his first point of advice as his budding father was to encourage her to get an abortion. Mm. And she didn't want to do that, praise the Lord, because that was me. And it got kind of yucky because his dad, who was known as the Boy Scout of the extended family, basically dragged him to the altar with a shotgun saying, okay, well, now you're marrying her. He wasn't ready. And he even now acknowledges he was not ready. He had a lot of really rough stuff that happened to him and his story. There's some sexual abuse. There's a lot of stuff with anger. And a lot of that got pulled forward into what was to become my childhood. And growing up in that house, it was like a powder keg. Anything and everything could set my dad off. You never know when it would be. If you didn't move fast enough about something, it could be some piece of hard material projected at your head at high speed. If you did do something too aggressively, well, that could also be the same thing. There were broken bones, there were bruises, there were explanations to school people about falling and all that kind of stuff. It gets pretty dark. Mm. A lot of verbal explosions. I found later on he was involved with a number of other ladies. I didn't know that at the time, but I do know that what I saw and how I saw him treat my mother clearly wasn't right either. So when I was in 6th grade, it came out that it turns out it wasn't just abuse to the two of us boys who were the older, but there was also a very unique type of abuse happening to my sister, who's the youngest. And he did confess to what was happening there, and he went to jail for 10 years at that point.
Wow.
And so even right already, you see, we kind of have the ground set for a pretty dark beginning. I was a pretty angry young boy already at this point. Nominally, both my parents were Protestant, but my dad was a raging hot mess, and my mom was just trying to survive. And so, like, what room is there for a living, vibrant faith in that environment, right? And so I kind of at that point in time was like, screw the whole church thing. All this religion thing is just garbage anyways. Look where it's got me. I don't want anything to do with this. But here's what's worse. I was a smart cookie, right? And so what do you do when you're smart, hurt, and very angry? You lash out randomly, right? That's just kind of what you do. And it's, Lord forgive me for some of the stuff I would say to like people at school and whatnot, other kids at school. And so they weren't smart enough to kind of keep up with the backlash. So their way of retaliating was to refer to me in the context of what my dad did to my sister. And that was a rough one. Like that kind of put some very jacked up sexual ideas in my head and like just a tremendous amount of shame going on. And so I'm going through, it's now high school and I don't know what's going on with what. I finally find a girlfriend. It just to put another piece of context here. As soon as my mom found out I had a girlfriend for more than a week, her first move was to go buy a whole bunch of contraceptives for me and say, here you go. This is what you need to make sure that, what happened to me doesn't happen to you. And Lord love her, I know she was trying and willing hard, but combined with the fact that my dad had pornography all over the place, and back when he was living home, if my mom was gone, there'd be pornography on the TVs, and sometimes even a family movie that will say an X-rated movie might be on with the kids in the room. And so I had a lot of sexual exposure early on. And so as I'm nearing the end of high school, I kind of had two ideas in my head. I had the idea that the organized faith didn't have much to it at all, and really, it's all about chasing pleasure. That's really the purpose of this life. And in contrast to that was one soul's little bright spot, which I didn't know what to make of. But when I was in 9th grade, I worked at Kmart. The job where they sent you out with the carts and you had to go out and get the carts up and carry the heavy stuff out. That's kind of a fun job until it's February and you have like 25 inches of snow on the ground. It's 20 below zero as you're pushing stuff out there. So there's another guy named Paul, and Paul had the same position, and we were the same age. And we kind of got to chatting out there, and we realized we had two great loves. We both loved to argue, and we both loved the outdoors. Those two go very well together. And so here I am in high school, and I start connecting with Paul, and we'd go skiing in the winter and hiking, cross-country skiing, and then hiking in the summer. And the entire time we were always arguing, mostly theology, but could be anything. And I, at least by this point in time, had learned you can't just insult people. And so I was able to maintain a civil tongue. And Paul, Lord love him, he had a patience with me I did not deserve. So as we became better friends, eventually I went over to Paul's house and got to meet his family. And there was something different in that family. And, Eric, I don't know what your family was like growing up, but when you come from as broken a background as I do, and you walk into a house where kids aren't flinching and people are just breathing, and there's just some peace in the environment, and it doesn't feel like every moment the tension will rip all the emotional stuff into little shatters, it caught my attention. I didn't know what to make of it, but it caught my attention. You look at the question.
No. So yeah, a bunch of questions, man. So you're in the 9th grade when this is at this point in the story, right? And so you're seeing sort of for the first time, 9th grader, you're what, 14, something like that?
Yeah, about that. Yeah.
For the first time, you're seeing what you're describing as a sort of a more normal family life where people aren't afraid of being abused. There's not this tension and amplification of emotions, things like that. This is the first time you've experienced that?
I had one other friend that weathered my onslaught of horribleness. His name was David, and David's family wasn't Christian. There wasn't active abuse there, but they had what I would describe, and I think they would allow me to describe it as pretty much a dead marriage that they quit and stayed. And so all of that tension was still there. And so David and I hung out. We had a good time. We both played computer games. But it wasn't safe. It wasn't calm. And so Paul's house was different in that regard.
Okay. So tell me so your sister is how much younger than you?
4 years.
4 years younger than you. And so, and you said your dad went off to jail for 10 years. At what point in your lives did that happen? Did that go down?
I was in sixth grade, and I still remember vividly. I had this very, very vivid memory in mind. So I was in the band in sixth grade, and I was in kind of this front room where we had a piano and I had my instrument. And I was practicing, and I overheard this conversation between my mother and my sister. And she was asking them, and at one point I heard some of the words they were saying,
Mm.
and like all attention to the music instrument just was gone. I was like, I don't care about this music. I'm listening to this because I knew with what I was hearing and what my sister was describing that my dad had done to her, my life was about to have a radical change.
Mm.
And so it was sixth grade, and I think, bluntly, honestly, Eric, I think the signs were there that stuff was happening earlier, and that my mom was just too overwhelmed and too scared to really dig into it.
Yep. And so did that once that conversation happens between your mom and your sister, do things start to change pretty rapidly? I mean, police and all this, and
it was real fast. It was real fast. So it was probably within a week, my dad was in jail. Like, probably within a few days. Like that day, I believe police were involved, and maybe it was 2 days. I forget now. And he pled guilty, and so it was a very rapid trial.
And so he goes off to jail. Was he the breadwinner in the family, or how did that? I mean, life has to change. Your father goes off to jail.
Oh, totally. He was. And we went from having almost no money to having actually no money. So my mother was halfway through a nursing degree when she became pregnant. And that obviously wasn't going to be a way to raise a family. Like, you can't go back to nursing school. And so she got a lot of support from the community. I'm not actually sure exactly how all that went down. I didn't really see that as a kid, but she managed to get her accounting degree. And so it was probably 2 years where we had like no money at all other than what people in the community supported us with. And then after that, she had some money coming in. And by the grace of God, when my parents got married, his parents gave them enough money for a down payment on a house, a pretty significant down payment on a house. So we owned a house. And my mother was able to get just enough, charitable donation kind of money to pay for that house payment before she got her job.
Yep. Yep. So are you thinking at this point that, is life like, is there like a major inflection at this point where, either your plans, cause I'm trying to think back to when I was in the sixth grade, and as a sixth grader or seventh grader, you're starting to formulate like, this is what I'm wanting to go do in my life, and what I want my life to sort of look like. And this thing happens to you. This is not this thing, but your father goes off to jail, and now you've got this massive family change. Do you remember kind of how that manifested in your own kind of, life in that moment?
Yeah, so let me set some context here. I do not remember having elaborate plans at this point. It was so much more about survival. I knew I wanted out, and I don't think I was aware enough. I was in too much survival mode to recognize that with my dad going to jail, how much more difficult it would be financially. And so I was just kind of a little bit like, wait a second here. I don't have to worry about getting beaten right now. Yeah. Like, that's going to change. And that was a big one. Now, I was starting at that point already to come into some pretty serious growth. My dad didn't really, he had turned the physical away from me and was mostly just verbal at that point, because I was probably at least 5'6", probably at least 130, 150 space for weight. And so that part of it slowed down, but it really was just the peace and the release, the freedom. Now, I was really, really good at math. And so my mother had already encouraged me to shoot that. She said, engineers get paid well. You should go become an engineer. It's a little ironic given where I'm ending up now as an entrepreneur. But at the time, that was her advice. And again, I think this was really just coming from her perspective of escape this literal hellhole that you're in right now and build something radically different with your life. And that was kind of my perspective as well.
Yeah. And how was your sister through this? I mean, how did she kind of manage through this? And
so prior to I'd say for the first, almost all the way through the end of her middle school, she and I were very close. And so she and I were very close. So all three of us kids banded together. It's kind of a survival against dad kind of deal. And my sister to this day publicly says that she has no memory of these events. And I don't know if that's a gift of God or what, but that's her story to go any deeper than that. But my relationship with her right there was still very, very close. And it's only when she really hit high school that all of a sudden we just hit loggerheads and really had some rough years.
What was that? Was there something that kind of caused that?
I think a little bit. When she hit puberty, my sister was and is a very attractive lady, and all of a sudden she started getting a whole bunch of attention from guys, started becoming very popular, and I was not popular. Like, let's be crystal clear about this. I was a jerk face, and so popularity was not my forte. And so all of a sudden, like, my role in her perspective was I'm supposed to drive her around because at this point in time, I'm driving, and I was like, no, I got my own life. I'm not going to drive you around, and that was a loggerhead.
I see. Okay. All right. Okay. And so if you're kind of painting this picture of you're sort of this ne'er-do-well, right? You get argumentative and kind of angry, chip on the shoulder, all this.
Oh yeah.
Student wise, I'm presuming if you progress into college and we know kind of where your degrees kind of lead out, you were a good student.
I was super smart. I didn't have to try. I could literally do nothing and just show up and ace the tests. I mean, just to give you a sense of how much of a jerk I was, I don't tell the story to brag, but I remember being in college and I was still super angry. And I had this math professor, Lord love him. He wasn't that good. And he would make these mistakes. And I was so disdainful of him. I would sit in the front row with a fiction novel. I would hold up, like not even flat on the desk, holding it up in the air, reading it, obviously during his lecture. And then while looking at this novel, I would figure out the mistake he made in the board and raise my hand, eyes never leaving the novel, and said, you forgot the negative sign 2 lines up. That's what you're missing right there. The eyes never left the novel. And I can't believe he rolled with me the way he did. But like, that's just, when I say I was angry and chipped the shoulder, like I was not a happy young man.
Yeah. That's impressive though, I got to say. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. God has gifted me in that way very much. And it's
a bit of a Spicoli moment, right? If Spicoli actually had a brain, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, for my listeners that maybe grew up in the 80s, although Spicoli was a stoner, and so he wouldn't have had the intelligence to be able to pick out the math problem, but still the ability to kind of go, do a little verbal judo and a little verbal jousting with the professor always may be an interesting thing for a teenage kid, right?
Yeah, it felt like power. It felt like I had power in my life.
Right on. Okay. And so once you start to get to the end of high school, do you have a plan to go to college, and do you have the ability to go, or how does that kind of play out given the financial, situation of the family?
So when my dad leaves, my mom shifts into this survival at all costs, sacrifice everything, get the kids out into the world successfully. And so she was pretty smart too. And I mean, really both my parents are pretty smart. It's really a shame because my dad could have done so much more with his life had things been different. And her big thing was get scholarships. And so she was like ruthless. Like that was the thing, get scholarships. I applied to every scholarship out there under the sun. I had a perfect 4.0 and I ended up getting a full ride to undergrad. It was really a great deal, a little bit because financial, a little bit because of academic. And so I ended up with, well, not quite full, maybe I spent like $1,000, $2,000 total. And I think if I remember correctly, my dad's parents, my grandparents helped out with that.
Okay. Where'd you go to school?
Michigan Tech. The home way up in the north in the upper peninsula. It's an engineering school, and we would get so much snow that in order to move between buildings, it felt like you were walking through tunnels.
And the tech kids, the engineering minds, like it didn't matter, right? I assume there's probably no sports thing going on at the school, or
they had sports stuff. It wasn't exactly the highest rated classes and competing on the national scale, but they had sports. Right. But from my perspective, it didn't matter. I loved it. It was a fresh start. No one there knew my past. No one there knew what had happened to my family. I could be whoever I wanted to be.
Did you change personality wise? Did you become different?
I did. I had learned enough at this point in time. I got to stop being a complete and utter jerk. And so, or at least being a complete and utter jerk to people that I want to be friends. And so it was a fresh start for me in a lot of ways. I drank like a fish. I watched porn like it was going out of style. Like we had the dorm room I lived on would have at any given moment, and 24/7, there's always porn on somewhere on the dorm room floor. And the amount of alcohol I consumed in that time period is ridiculous.
Was that pretty common from your perspective amongst at your school, either in your dorm or just at your school in general?
It was very common. So also put some perspective here. The school's official ratio was 3 boys to 1 girl because such a heavy engineering school. And even those girls didn't want to be associated with us nerds. And so they generally had other boyfriends that were off. So like the effective ratio, if you were a dude there, your odds of getting a girlfriend were none. So what do? You go drink.
Yeah. Drink and watch porn.
Yep.
Yeah. I gotcha. Okay. And so you get your undergrad, then you move on. What happens after that?
So as I'm going through undergraduate, I actually ended up with 2 degrees, my undergraduate degree, just because I want to challenge myself a little more. And as I'm getting near the end of that, I'm like, what the heck am I going to do with my life here? I'm pursuing this church of hedonism, every pleasure I can find. It's not really fulfilling, but I'm not really ready to let it go. I'm still friends with Paul. He and I are still, staying connected, and he's still that little bit of bright spot in my life of a contrast, but I'm not ready for that yet. And I look around to a bunch of jobs. And I kind of look around, and I've always loved the cold. Imagine that. And so one of the job options I could have gone was up to Alaska. The oil companies pay top dollar, and then you only have to work a few months. You get a couple months off down here where you should spend all the money. And I thought about that, and I thought, I just don't feel like I'd be happy doing that long term. And so I started applying to graduate schools. And again, I've got great grades coming through undergraduate, and I got accepted at pretty much anywhere I wanted. MIT, Cornell, all the different places.
Yep.
And so I went around and visited them.
Yep. And then went on to do your get your graduate degree, get your graduate program started where? At Cornell?
At Cornell. And the reason why is I really love the facilities and the people at MIT. Really top-notch people. I really enjoyed. I actually think, don't tell the people at Cornell I said this, I actually think I like the people at MIT a little better, but I really loved Ithaca, New York. I was not a big city boy. I don't do big cities. Not my thing. I spent a few years living in Portland. That was rough.
Yeah.
And Ithaca is dreamlike, peaceful, and has winter. So that was the spot. No
doubt. Yeah, Ithaca. So that's, for those listening, right, that's a part of New York that no one thinks of when they think of New York, right? It's green, it's hilly, it's beautiful, right? It's country.
It's beautiful lakes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it is not a city in any stretch of the imagination. Yeah. Okay. And so you go off, get your master's degree there in engineering, are you at this point
I
starting to focus on chemistry? Okay.
Yeah. To put this in perspective, this is kind of how crazy I am. I had both a bachelor's in chemistry and a bachelor's in chemical engineering. And so I applied to MIT, and for the engineering, I applied to Cornell for the chemistry. And I could have swapped either one once I'm there, but I found a chemistry program I really enjoyed. And some people I really enjoyed at Cornell. And so I went with chemistry direction.
Yeah.
And so I finished the master's there, finished the doctorate there. Again, was blessed that between teaching fellowships and then eventually research fellowships, I made it through the entire process without any debt at all.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So, yeah. And so now you're probably fairly young too, I would think, to get through a PhD program typically takes more like closer to 10 years. At what age are you at this point? Mid-20s?
So, a little bit upper 20s, 27. Okay. And I was 5.5 years at Cornell. So I moved relatively well. They don't hold their PhD people in the sciences too long. Mm-hmm. Like if you're more like the artsy stuff, you got to go longer. We had all sorts of fun things we'd say to those guys, poor souls. But on the science and engineering, the STEM fields, they push them through because bluntly, they've got more people coming through, and the industry demand is so high.
Right. Okay. All right. So you get your PhD in chemistry, and now you're basically out of degrees to get, right? You've gotten them all. And so
I got to do something.
You got to go do something now, right? So 27 years old, PhD, what happens after that?
So one more detail here, going through graduate school, I finally started to actually have to work a little bit academically, and you get in some of those courses there. And this sounds a little bit egotistical perhaps, but through my life, I had always been the smartest guy in the room. And then I go to Cornell, and all of a sudden I wasn't. There are other guys that were level to me there. The Cornell graduate chemistry program, there's some other smart cookies. And I had to start working a little bit, which means I had to kind of cut back on the drinking, had to cut back on the porn, had to actually focus myself a little bit. And as I'm slowly clearing out of this fog, and I'm realizing this isn't getting me what I want in life. And all this time, I'm still friends with Paul. Paul, at this point in time, is married, has 2-3 children, something like that. I forget. He has 6 now. But at the time, I think it was like that. And so I was still driving down to Virginia, where he lived, to hang out for a week here and there during my breaks, just because he was happy to have me. We had a great time. We'd do hiking. The kids loved me. His brother loved me. Like, it was really, we were well connected. And in my final year of graduate school, this was now 12 years I've known Paul. And I'm down there in Virginia, and we're out hiking, and we're 2 or 3 miles up the hike of Old Rag, one of the mountains there in Virginia. And he stops, and he looks at me, and he says, "Michael, what's going on?" And I say, "What are you talking about, Paul?" He says, "Look, I've known you for 12 years now. You always argue with everything. I could tell you the sky is blue and the grass green. You're going to argue with me over it. And now all you're doing is just asking questions about the faith." And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, Paul. Yeah, okay, fine. I'm considering converting. And it's right in this last year of graduate school that God finally reached me. And so I'd actually already been attending Mass at this point in time before Paul found out, for probably about 3 or 4 months, not receiving. And I'm there in Mass, and it's coming up on, it's Ash Wednesday. And imagine this parish. The parish seats probably about, I don't know, 1,000 people, pretty decent sized building. And it's kind of a squarish, not a very, stylish building. And I walk in this Ash Wednesday, and there's this banner that covers most of the front hung up there. And the banner, well, before I tell you what to read, I should tell you what I was praying in the car. I was praying in the car, Lord, I'm just not happy with where I'm going. I know I need to make a change. I don't know what to do. I know eventually I think I'm supposed to go down this path, but I really don't want to do that yet. And the banner reads, repent today. I was like, dang it. All right. I guess I needed that obvious of a call. And so then I called Paul up that night and I said, all right, Paul, that's it. I'm ready to do it. I'm throwing in the white towel. I'm done. How do we do this? And so go ahead.
So I guess I missed the part because I was assuming at this point you had zero faith, but it sounds like you had a faith life. You had some relationship with God. You were in a mode of prayer and praying at least at some basis.
That happened partway through graduate school. Yeah, towards the end of graduate school.
What spurred that? Because I mean, it sounded like initially you're thinking, man, Christians are hypocrites, right? My parents are Protestants, but they don't really. It's a horrible family life, and it's a bad situation. What point does faith actually start to play a role in your life?
Well, ever since I met Paul's family, there's always that glimmer of hope, that maybe there is a way that works, but I don't want that way. And honestly, Eric, I praise the Lord for this in some ways. I wasn't very good at chasing girls, but I wasn't horrible. And so I'd caught a few and enough to kind of get a sense that you wake up the next morning or the next week or the next month, and you're like, actually, my heart still feels empty. Like, despite how, the world might say that this was the best all end all be all, I'm not satisfied with this. And the same thing with the alcohol. Like I'm praise the Lord, I never got to do anything rougher than alcohol. But like I drank all the stuff and I still wasn't satisfied with it. And so that's why I kept hanging out with Paul, because a piece of me was like, something in his family was right that wasn't in my family, even though nominally they're both Christian, but something was there. And so like this growing desire to find something that just didn't suck, that I didn't wake up every day being like, all right, another day. What a lousy piece of junk day is this going to be? And it just was nothing there for me. And I think for the longest time, my prayer was that of St. Augustine, Lord, give me chastity, but not yet. And even in full disclosure, even after my official conversion, I still kind of had that prayer in my back pocket a little bit.
Sure. I think that's pretty common for most. I mean, for all of us. What's also really interesting to me as I kind of consider this now and think about the overlay of these two things, right? So your faith life is growing and you're getting more and more high-level degrees in the sciences, right? Which a lot of, I think, people or the world would say that you can't really be both, right? You can't be science and faith, because science is all about proof and it's all about evidence and data, and the faith is all about this. It's sort of hocus pocus and just, hopeful thinking and whatever else, right? And they can't overlay. And yet you obviously have, right? You've excelled at the highest levels of science, and now I know your faith story continues on. Talk a little bit about that. How was that for you as you're this science-based nerd that's also got a faith life? How did those two things kind of coexist?
In a lot of ways, I was a rugged empiricist. What I mean by that is I'm going to do the test, collect the data, and see which direction the data points. If there's one thing that my mentor in graduate school said, is he said, I don't care what preconceived notions or models you have going into an experiment. If the data points in a certain direction, you follow the data and see where the data goes. And he was very good at that. And as a result, it was not uncommon that we would write a proposal and our conclusions would be radically different than the proposal, which didn't look good, but it was truth. And so that was kind of being built into me. That resonated with me very well. I've always valued the truth. Find the truth, follow the data, because that's the only thing I can rest on. And I think for me, I needed something that would work. I needed something where the data would come together. And I'd seen it work a little bit, but I don't know how much I want to dive in the Catholic versus Protestant thing here as I was doing this discernment. But for my particular journey, I was a young man and I had a Protestant come up to me and said, you get to read the Bible, interpret it for yourself. And I said, done. I'm going to read, says, go forth and, populate the earth. I'm all over that one. And so I realized pretty quickly that any religion that said I get to interpret something for myself may not be the right path for me, because I was just a little too eager to have that. Yeah. And then I started researching Catholicism. I dug deep into it. And let me also give a lot of credit to Paul. Paul is also a very smart young man at this point. He's a very smart man now too, but he was a young man then. And he handled the arguments that I gave him really well. And from a pragmatic perspective too, he didn't get lost in, I'll say, abstract theology. He was very pragmatic, and he was humble enough that when every now and then if I'd stump him, he'd own it and come back a week later with an answer. Yeah. And as a scientist, to me, that made perfect sense. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't have the answer now, but I'll do the test to find out. And it was incredibly pragmatic for me. It was incredibly, I'm one of the few people that I did not have an emotional encounter with our Lord until well after my conversion. I converted because I said, I don't see any other way to get to where I want to get in life.
That's awesome. I love you sharing that. All right. So you've seen this banner that says repent. And so you decide to go down this path of converting from the Christian faith that you were to Catholicism, which normally there's a program, which is the rite of the RCIA program, rite of conversion,
rite of Christian initiation for adults.
There it is. And so, but you don't go down that path, right? You actually go through a slightly
No, I don't. Route. I tried. Oh, this is a great story. So, and I say this to keep all of us Catholics humble. So I contact the RCA director of the parish I've been attending. Nope, flat out. You can't join. It's too late in the year. I said, but look, come on. I am super smart. I will learn any book you want to in like a day. Nope, not interested. Fine, whatever. Okay. And so I call Paul up. First off, I call every parish within a decent driving distance. No one will let me in the RCA for this year, but I'm graduating this year. So I don't have time to do the full RCIA. And so they're like, don't worry. You can just transfer to a different parish and then restart the next year after that. I'm like, I don't want to wait 3 stinking years. I'm ready to join. It's a 12-year journey. Like I want it today. Like I want my McDonald's hamburger and my conversion today. So I call Paul up, and Paul has this great metaphor. He's like, so I guess the prodigal son came home after 12 years, but the windows and doors were all boarded up and nailed up, and he's not, and he knocks on the back door and is told everyone's already in bed. And so I said, well, I'll poop. So I go to this pastor who I really respect, but this poor guy, he was the only priest assigned to this gigantic parish, and he was beyond overwhelmed. And so he actually met with me, and I said, I would like for you to do private instruction with me. And I could tell he really didn't have the time for it. And I think he was trying to fish out if I was serious. And so his first question, Lord love him, I wouldn't have chosen this one. He says, great, list for me in order all the Old Testament prophets. And my brain just locked. I was ready for any sort of actual complex theological discussions applies to life. And I rattled off a few of them. I did not do a good showing of that. And he didn't roll his eyes, but effectively did. He says, fine, what are the 4 gospels? And I'm like, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. He's like, no, I don't know why I'm asking. I really don't have time for this. Go somewhere else. And so after a tremendous amount of searching and calling, I found a man about an hour and a half away who's a old Italian priest, a small parish, and he agreed to do private instruction for me. And so it was great. This guy was just exactly what I needed. Not at all a type A personality, super chill. He'd show up, Michael, how are you doing? Did you read the book? Oh, I did, Father. Great. What questions do you have? And so we met once a month, and we'd go over it. And he didn't, it's not that he didn't care. He trusted me to know when I was right. And one day I said, okay, I'm ready. Very good. If you're ready, we'll do it this Saturday. And so it is a Saturday evening mass that I joined the church.
And how long was that process? How long did the whole thing take?
3 or 4 months.
Okay.
It was fast.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. All right. So, so now you've got this new shiny new faith, and you're a freshly minted new Catholic, but I would presume that you're also about to become a working man, right? You're about to go off and earn your new place in life at the helm of earning income and paying taxes and all those fabulous things.
Oh, yes. The stars are full in the sky. The sun is shining brightly. Everything is blue and cheery. All of my problems in the past have been solved entirely at this point in time, right? There's no lurking dragons underneath me that are about to surface and consume and cause problems. Right.
Yeah, those dragons are, they don't go away, right? We know that. They lurk in the darkness. Okay. So what is that first step into the working world look like?
It's 2008, right during the economic crash. And I have this amazing first round of interviews, Dow, DuPont, Corning, any chemistry company you name. They're like, oh, for sure, you're a shoe-in. We'd love to have you. The crash happens. We can't answer our phone calls all of a sudden, except for one company, Intel, out in Hillsboro, Oregon, on the West Coast. I'm not going to the West Coast, man. I'm in the North. I'm a Midwest guy. I like North. I like snow. I don't want perpetual rain. What the heck's the point of rain anyways? I don't want to go to Portland. Go to my boss. He's like, I'm out of money for you. Do you want to work for free, or do you want to work for Intel? And I said, well, golly, I guess I'm going over to the Pacific Northwest after all. So I went on over there and started working for Intel. And in a lot of ways, I loved it. It's Intel research area is best defined as, or described as, a beehive on methamphetamines. It is intense.
Wow.
And you got to move, and you got to be fast. And I kind of enjoyed that, actually.
And probably a lot of very, very bright people that were able to challenge you kind of emotionally, psychologically, intelligence, all of that.
Oh, absolutely. And they don't accept excuses. One of my guys, he was a European guy and he was a manager, and he had this voice. You walk up like there had been some problem, and you're like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it won't happen again. And he look at you. Well, what did you change? No, there wasn't a problem in the first place. Well, clearly it was, and so you didn't change anything, and you expect a different result. And I was like, well, Victor, you put it that way, maybe you have a point. But no, it was a lot of fun there. Challenging, but a lot of fun.
Yeah. Did you find, so what I'm curious about too, so with this faith, and usually my perspective would be someone who's newly converted, man, they're on fire for the faith, right? Then
yes,
fire and their passion for, their newly budding relationship with God and Jesus Christ and all these things. And you go into a corporate sciencey based world on the West Coast. Did those two streams kind of cross? How did that kind of play out?
So back in 2008-09, the woke environment hadn't spread anywhere near as far as it had now. And in fact, is part of my later on story, part of the reason I leave Intel did involve some of that stuff starting to come in. But at the time, it really wasn't too bad. I think the bigger conflict was that I need to throw one more detail in here. I forgot. My dad gets out of jail, and I actually, for a very brief period, did have a small relationship with him as he's coming out of jail. I was at this point in early graduate school years, and his idea of how to spend time with me was to take me to a strip club and buy strippers for me as to do all the stuff. And that was how he considered to have. And I tell this detail just to reinforce that was the impression of the gender dynamics that I inherited from my dad. And, Lord love my mother, but moms can't really convey to a young boy the proper way to view the other gender. That's really the job of a dad. And despite the fact that even now, here I am, converted, Catholic, intellectually, I know the truth about that men ought to honor women and not objectify them, coded into my environment of how I see the world, that's still there. And so that was by far the bigger conflict for me, actually. And so there's even, I'll say, starting Intel, now all of a sudden, I had a starting salary with 6 digits. And this is the first time in my life I've ever been like, whoa, what's happening to my bank account right now? Like, this is different. Yeah. And so that was a challenge for me.
Pardon the interruption, everyone. Do you ever feel like you're out of alignment with your true gifts, your passion, and your purpose for being on this earth? Do you feel like you're grinding it out each week with the appearance of success and still asking, is this it? If so, I get it. I've been right where you're at. And once I figured it out for myself, it's why I started coaching. Now I help my clients get back into alignment with their authentic self. I help them find meaning, purpose, joy, and energy in each day. Check out my website at ericsardina.com to learn more and to schedule a free 15-minute strategy session. And now, back to the show. How did that play out as far as how does money kind of play out for you then? Because again, you just kind of hit upon it, triggered a thought, which was you grew up in a very sort of poor poverty level type environment, trying to figure out how to make things work financially. And all of a sudden you're abundant with cash. Did money step into this role of something to be worshiped then at that point? Or was it still more this sort of interesting thing off to the side that was happening?
It was more that it suddenly wasn't a problem. And my mother is super fiscally conservative. And so the only reason that we made it through when my dad left is that she hoarded every penny, and she taught all of us kids to do that. And so all the way through graduate school, in addition, even though I didn't have any debt, it's not like you have a lot of income coming through that period. And so I still made it through there. And so just by, living on rice and beans, as it were. And at first I was doing that, but I quickly realized, dude, I'm making too much money for this. And so I started allowing some comforts in, but I don't think that really got out of control, excepting insofar as it then came to the ladies. And so that was kind of a bigger problem for me, is now all of a sudden I have money. Now all of a sudden ladies like me. And all of a sudden I can, get a nicer car. I got the nicest car ever, like 3 days after I got this job. Cause all of a sudden I did the math. I'm like, dude, I can afford a way nicer car than the old beater minivan I was trying to drive when I was going to college. Right.
What'd you get?
It turns out, it wasn't super fancy. It was just a brand new Toyota RAV4, and It was a white. And I got a deal on it with white because my mother's blood influence telling me save $1,000, get white. Okay, sure, why not?
There you go, man. Very economically savvy, right there, right?
But it was still way nicer than the old beater Honda Odyssey that I was driving before.
Right. Yeah. Nothing like a dude driving a minivan while he got his first job out of school, and it's not exactly the magnet of the ladies, right?
No, it's not.
Yeah. All right. So I'm curious kind of how your time progresses at Intel, because you start talking about the woke thing, it starts to play a role. How does that sort of play out for you?
So at this point, I was pretty quiet about my faith at work. I was going to church mass every week very regularly. I was on a number of dating websites trying to get married. I knew that was the next thing. I knew I wanted a family. And I kind of had my work life and then I had my personal life, and they were pretty separate. And I tried to be kind at work. And obviously, you may have picked up, I've got some silliness in me, so it can make people laugh. But outside of that, people wouldn't even know that I was Christian, that I'm Catholic while I'm at work. And I meet this young lady who eventually becomes my wife, although both of us swore that would not happen after our first meeting. And we're using a dating site called eHarmony. And the only reason she agrees to actually meet with me at all was to close the match out, because she's coming from Seattle. She is super blue. She is just a recent convert to Protestantism. And best part of all, she joins this Protestant church, one of those flavors that believes that all Catholics are going straight to hell. And so she gets matched with this very conservative, Northern Michigan, conservative Catholic on eHarmony. And she's like, no way, no chance. Let's just close this thing out so I don't waste any time. She meets with me. We have a phenomenal time together, and both agree we should never meet again. Same thing happened the next night. Same thing happened the night after that, too. Except at that point, we stopped saying we should never meet again, because clearly that wasn't happening. Again, rugged empiricist here.
Right. All right. And so you're dating your wife, or you're dating your to-be wife, and then what's happening then from there? And what, I guess, so time frame wise, is this starting to get into more like the early, I guess what you would call the odds? I don't know what they call that, right? What's the 2010s or the early?
Yeah. Like everything else, I wanted it right now. So my wife and I met, we were engaged. I think I could give these numbers slightly wrong. She'd slap me upside the head probably if I get these wrong, but whatever. 9 months roughly after we met, we were engaged. And about 9 months after that, we were married. And about 9 months after that, we had our first kiddo. And it was very, very fast through there. And it was bluntly too fast. And it was through this process that I started to realize I still had some serious dragons lurking down in the deep utter dungeons of myself.
Right. Which I would presume our alcohol and porn are still there.
And anger. There's a tremendous amount of anger that still comes back from that shame and that anger from what happened back when I was a kid, and the way the high schoolers and the middle schoolers just ridiculed me of all that stuff. And then I internalized that shame as being something about me. And so it was something about the dynamics of marriage when you are required to engage with a woman in a different level than you do when you're dating, when you're required to evaluate yourself and who I am from a whole new lens. Like the moment that ring goes in the finger, who you are and your identity shifts. And that shift had some troubles budging because there were some bricks in the bottom that didn't want to budge.
Which were?
The biggest first one was anger. I had mostly quit drinking at that point. I knew porn was bad. I hadn't totally nipped in the bud, but I cut it off when I got married, because I'm married now. I don't need porn any longer, right? Because I can just have sex with my wife whenever I want. That's how this works, right? And for those who are not married, that is not a reasonable expectation of marriage. But the biggest one really was anger, because for the first time ever, you've got to live with one person who's imperfect and who mirrors back to your own imperfections. And I didn't like that. Like I had gone through, I was a PhD Cornellian with chemistry. I was the hot stuff, man. Like, what do you mean that I have imperfections? And so that was very, very difficult for me.
So did your marriage have some rough spots kind of in the early years?
I think it still has rough spots now. I'll fully confess to you, I'm still selfish, son of a gun at times. And my wife, while practically perfect, may have a moment of selfishness here and there too. And so marriage is always a work. And I would say, as such things go, we are in a lot of stress through a lot of points of our marriage. So we had not intended to have children at first. In fact, fun fact, we were new Catholics and we were trying to practice NFP. And so we abstained for the first 3 nights of our honeymoon. And because those were the end of the windows. When you plan your wedding and the date, you don't really know how the phases are going to line up when you plan your wedding date. And it just happened to fall there. So the first 3 nights we abstained, and we were at that 1%, 0.1% chance probability numbers. By the way, take those numbers seriously, because those numbers are now called my oldest child. And
and for those listening, NFP, the acronym you threw out there, natural family planning. So that is basically I guess, I don't know if other faiths also use natural family planning, but it's basically planning the times that you're going to, have a relation with your wife around her cycle, and when she is ovulating, when she is most likely to become pregnant. And so you're choosing when you would have intercourse or when you would not. And what you're saying is that based on that schedule, she was at her optimal time of getting pregnant right when you were married. So you were choosing to abstain so that she didn't get pregnant.
Correct.
But you started to then Yeah. So, but then you started to play in the areas of that schedule where it's very, very unlikely, but not 100% unlikely. And that became child number one.
So it's interesting. I need to do one more addition to NFP description. I think a lot of people have this idea that's something called like the rhythm method. You just look at the days, and so much more than that now.
Yes.
And the amount of scientific data you can get between temperatures, hormone analysis, other data that you can ask an NFP expert that will go into great detail for you. As a scientist, I ate all that data up. I thought it was awesome. And so as a scientist, I understood probability. I'm like 1%. I do a lot of 1% odd stuff in my life. This one's probably fine, right? There's a longer story if you want. I can tell you about what precipitated that. And it's one of the very few times in my life I've ever actually heard an audible voice from God. But clearly my firstborn was planned.
Well, you got to share that story, I think.
All right. So here's the deal. I, at the time, always woke up earlier than my wife. All right. I always wake up early. That's just been one of the things. She likes to sleep in. And I do not like coffee. If my wife could fix one material failing of mine, she wishes I like coffee. She loves coffee. Coffee in the morning, her number one go-to thing. Like that's her love language. And so here I am. I get up and I think I'm going to make a big breakfast. Okay. Also, I love breakfast. She does not. So I'm like, I'm going to make a big breakfast for us in the morning because that's selfish me. I'm going to do what I want this morning, right? So I go to this grocery store. She's still asleep. We're still on our honeymoon. And it's day 4. And I'm walking up this thing. I still go over there. I'm like, oh, look, there's a Starbucks at this grocery store. I hear a voice in my head, get her a coffee. Yeah, I'll do that. That's a good idea. Walk in the store. And so I go through the store. I forget what I got, corned beef hash, some eggs, whatever. And I'm going through, I see somebody walk by me carrying a Starbucks coffee from the Starbucks place. Again, I hear a voice, get her coffee. Yeah, that's a good idea. I should do that. I go check out the food. I'm walking out of the store with the food, heading towards my car. I look back and saw the Starbucks sign, and I hear something that says basically like, hey, you, I told you, go get her a coffee. I'm like, fine. I put the food in the car, go back, get her a coffee, and go drive home. Now, unknowns to me at the same time, she's already woken up and she's praying as well. Lord, I really don't want to have a baby right away. So give me a sign if we're out of the window that we can, connect as a husband and wife for the first time here in our marriage. And how about, and she hears this voice that says something like, or impression, I don't put words in her mouth. If he comes back with a coffee, you should do it.
And there we have it, right? So yep. I think God was like, well, it is time for a child in this young couple's life. And so you got the big the sense of humor of God in that moment, right?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So let's kind of move forward a little bit in your story. So now we're married. I'm curious, I guess, so does your wife know about your history with drinking and with pornography and some of those things? She knows about your family life and some of that. So what else does she know about you at this point?
I think she knows intellectually all those things. And in that hyper optimism of newlyweds, both of us have this perspective of, yep, all that stuff happened, but it's all in the past. And we're now free from all that history. So I think that's about the knowledge level that she was at for there.
Yep. And does it stay there or does it start to?
Oh, no. So I think I reached the culmination of realizing how much problem I have with anger. I'm going to speed up the story a little bit. When that firstborn was almost 1, and I'm in the cry room at Mass, and she was just throwing a temper tantrum and doubling down on her temper tantrum. And I was livid. Like I didn't hurt her, but like I was squeezing her. Like I probably had veins popping in my forehead. Like I was livid with this child at this moment, like disproportionately so, radically disproportionately so. And at the time, I didn't even have the self-awareness to be like, something is wrong here. I just knew that I was livid. And because that's how my dad was, that's how dads are. They just get extremely angry. That's my example of fatherhood. And unknowns to me, there's a man named Ben who's watching. Lord bless Ben. I can't believe he had the guts to do it into what he does in this story. Well, next Sunday, after Mass, Ben walks up to me and introduces himself. Now, I didn't know that my wife knew Ben's wife and they were already becoming friends, but that's something I didn't know at this point in the story. And Ben says, hey, my name is Ben. This is going to seem a little bit out of left field, but I was wondering if I have a moment to talk to you. I said, sure, why not? I'm a cool dude. I can talk to new people. Why not? And Ben says, cool. So, this may seem a little odd, but somebody once long ago offered me some help, and I just feel compelled to offer you some help as well. He hands over a flash drive. Because on this flash drive is a whole ton of audiobooks and audio talks about the faith and about different parts of the life that really, really helped me. I'd like to give it to you. And he looks at me and says, look, I don't know where you're at, but if you're open to this, it'd be great. If you throw it away in the trash the moment I turn my back, okay, that's up to you. So one more thing, he hands me his card and says, if you want to ever talk, let me know. We'll do lunch. And I was a little bit caught, flat-footed there. I'm not quite sure what to do, but I said, "Sure, that's great. Thanks, Ben. Nice to meet you." And went home and was like, "Do I want to throw something in the trash or not? I can't really tell." And my wife, I think, was prepped off by his wife. This was going down, but she didn't tell me that at the time. She's like, "Well, why don't you just give it a shot?" So I flipped the old flash drive in the PC and pop up first talk, Deacon Bob McDonald, dealing with anger. I'm like, "Oh, great. I see what's going on here." And true to his word, Ben honored that. And so we had many lunches together, and he was probably about 10, 15 years older than me, had, quite a ways down the family trail. And he was, I'll say, one of the first really helpful mentors I had. And through the work with him and through the talks that I had, I started to realize, goodness, I have got some serious baggage still going on inside of me. And at this point, the kids are starting to come rapid fire. Let me put some context in this. We had 6 kids in 8 years and 13 pregnancies in those 8 years.
Wow. And so you had a high number of miscarriages then as well.
Yes, we did.
Yep. Yeah. As we did as well. As we were, again, our years of having kiddos, miscarriages as well. How did that impact y'all? I mean, that's one of those things I think that, or I shouldn't say did it. It certainly does. But I think from my perspective, I didn't have an awareness as a young parent or a young husband that this was a fairly common thing, and that there was a likelihood that it was going to happen. It was initially our first miscarriage very shocking. The second miscarriage is absolutely devastating. And so I'm curious maybe how that impacted y'all as well.
I think I was blessed. I knew a little more about its probability going into it. We also, I don't know if we're going close to blessing or not, most of ours were relatively quick. Most of them were a month and a half at most. There was only one that went notably beyond that. And it's such a mixed emotional bag. I think when I talk to men about miscarriage, there are so many emotions that happen there. And some of them almost seem inappropriate. I will fully confess to you, there were times that especially when in the thick of lots of kids, there was a bit of relief in me where I was like, okay, good. We don't have to have another infant right now. And I feel so overwhelmed. And there's always a certain amount of sadness, especially early on. There's more sadness. And there's always a certain amount of sadness. There's a certain amount of fear. There's, what is this going to do to me? What's going to do to my wife, to our marriage? There's a certain amount of worry. Is there something wrong with us? Is something wrong with me? Is something wrong with her? I don't know. And so there's so many different emotions that go spiraling through there. And it's a different set of emotions that's supposed to going through our wives. And so it is a very, very stressful thing, I think, for a young couple to deal with. Now, to put in context, I was in 30, 31, 32 for the bulk of them. And my wife is 4 years younger than me.
Yep. To me, the whole idea of life in the womb, is when you experience both when you become aware that your wife is pregnant, the joy or the terror or the emotion that comes out is a demonstration to me that you recognize there is life in that moment, right? So this whole argument, though, there's not really life until X stage or until the baby, is actually walking around the house or whatever it is such nonsense to me, because any human that's ever had a pregnancy test result show positive or negative, you realize, yes, we are having a baby, there is life, or no, we are not having a baby, there is no life. It's absolutely evident. And then when you have a miscarriage and that life is now over, it is ended, you have that again, like you said, whether it's I have this conflicted feeling of relief, like, oh my gosh, this baby is not going to be walking around the home anytime soon. And I have some amount of guilty relief for that because I don't know how I'm going to, afford. It's the body recognizing life and the fact that life is ended, or a later miscarriage when you're absolutely devastated, as my wife and I were. Again, recognition that this isn't life. This is not just, something going on inside her that's, that is not life. It absolutely is your body reflecting the realization and the understanding that there is life, and deny that is just an absolute lie in my mind. I don't see how scientifically you can even say, right, that it's not an absolute lie to deny that.
Oh, it was objectively clear, scientifically speaking, that life begins the moment of conception, even the time of Roe v. Wade. In fact, it was noted in some of the defense documents, or some of the legal documents, that it was scientifically proven life inarguably begins at the moment of conception. And not to go too far off that side tangent, but I don't think the issue was ever about whether life exists there. I think it's far darker than that. But in terms of the life and dealing with the realities of life as a parent and as a couple that are struggling, particularly overlaying my own weaknesses regarding sex and anger, was very, very difficult in our marriage, because this idea, my wife's response, which I sometimes is a fairly common response to a miscarriage, is to actually pull back from the sexual embrace a little bit, to kind of recover, to have time to mourn the passing of this child. And that was something I struggled with. And because to me, she was the new sexual outlet for me. And this is not right or holy or good at all. Like I'm calling this out as a major failure on my part. She was the new sexual outlet that replaced all the pornography and the womanizing. And when she refused to play that role, that really sent me emotionally into a tizzy. Like I would get worked up. I would get angry. At times in my marriage, I've turned to porn to try to escape this feeling of this rejection. And at the same time, that just pushes your wife further away.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is a common thing, right? I think with the internet being what it is, the explosion of the porn industry by virtue of the fact that this computer we carry around in our pocket can give you full access to anything that you want to look at within 2 clicks. It preys upon, I think, all of the sinful nature that is kind of potentially within, all men and women as well. I've recently learned something that I had no awareness of, which is there's a fairly high amount of women that have a similar addiction to pornography as men, right? It's not a male only thing.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and then using that as an outlet again to release dopamine, all the things that we can do, that is convincing your brain this is actually a replacement, or I'm replacing the interaction with my wife with this pornography, can convince your brain, at least to some degree, right? For that hormonal response, you basically get the girl without having to do the work, right? I think
there's one other element to it, if I could add. Yep. I think it's a tremendous amount of control.
Yeah.
When we, as particularly men, but I think there's a great deal of overlap with this with women, but I want to speak just as men. When we don't have control, we freak out. Like we particularly want control, and we're designed from the beginning to have control over ourselves. Like if you read some of the church fathers talk about Adam and Eve in the garden, they most likely could regulate any part of their body by conscious will, because their will was in full alignment with God. So I want my heart rate to go up. I want my heart to slow down. I want to fall asleep. I want to wake up. All that was under full conscious control. Well, the fall happened, and obviously we don't have that anymore. It's a funny joke. The reason why women can never choose what to eat now is because the first time they ever tried, look what happened. But anyways, moving back to now. As a man, when I feel out of control, if I can't control myself, then I have to turn to controlling everyone else. If I can't control me, then I got to control you. Well, all of a sudden, if I can't control you and I can't control me, shoot. And you just get so deregulated. You kick into that fight or flight system. And so one of the biggest things porn does is says, okay, good. I can control. See, this girl, she did what I wanted her to do. So therefore, okay, I'm back in control. We're safe again. And so dopamine, absolutely. No one argues against the power of dopamine. But I think this regulation that comes from this feeling of being in control again is really, really powerful for men.
I had not thought about that. I did not consider that. It's very interesting. Okay, so I want to kind of move forward in the story a bit. So where is kind of like your life, your marriage, your family situation when things start to maybe change at work and you start to have this thought of, I'm going to leave Intel?
So I'll go a little speedy through this part. It's now almost 7 years at Intel, and I've been promoted. I'm doing well. And I have a blog I'm writing. It's Catholic. HR discovers the blog. Actually, coworkers discovered the blog, turned me to HR. I'm formally written up. Charged my boss, who I loved, best boss ever, pulls me to the side of the room, tells me about it. And ultimately, I have this full investigation by HR, all because I did one writing on my blog about Ephesians 5. You can guess where that went and how some ladies at work interpreted that. So I ended up being cleared by HR with the only requirement I had to remove the word Intel from the website, because I said in my About Me page, I said I work at Intel. So I replaced that with I work at a major semiconductor research factory based in Hillsboro, Oregon, because that's not the same thing. Right. So anyways, That didn't matter though. At work, all the relationships were strained. Every time I was now a manager, I had people under me. Every time I made a decision that wasn't in favor of a female in the room, comments or suggestions we made, oh, it's just he's whatnot. And so the writing was on the walls getting near the end. Intel offered a voluntary separation package, and it's a longer story, but God gave us a whole bunch of signs I'm supposed to move. We moved to Boise, started working for Micron. I went from the world's best boss to the world's worst boss, and we made it a year and a half. One other piece is happening here. We've talked a lot about my story. My wife's background story is a little better, but not a ton. And at this point in time, her mom is in her third marriage and is not handling it well. And they end up moving to Boise with us, move into our basement because they have no money and they can't afford anything. So a year into working at Micron, my wife has this idea. Let's buy a company. And then her mother's husband, who so far has failed 4 times in marriage to ever make any real money, he'll run it for us. That's a good idea. And my wife, she's a business background, so she'll help him run it. And I wasn't really thinking, I kind of knew in my gut this wasn't a great idea, but, I had lots of money at this point. I was making good money, so why not? We buy this company. It's a train wreck, and it's bleeding red all over the financial pages, just horrible in every regards. My wife's trying to help him out, pulling her hair out, screaming. And so after a year and a half at Micron, I take over running this company while I'm also working at Micron. And that was horrific. And
what kind of company was it?
It was a fencing company. We installed fences in Boise, Idaho.
Okay.
And it's so funny. I had a couple of clients, because you get some wealthy clients, and some of them were engineering guys, and they'd have these elaborate diagrams and schematics, and they'd pull them out with me. They think I'm just a fencing dude. And we were getting into tensors and force tensors at one point on what to do that. He paused, stop. How in the world are you still having this conversation with me? So I told him stuff, and he laughed. But this was a very powerful moment of prayer for me, because I knew that I couldn't keep doing where we were. And I really had a clear choice. I could either stay with a corporate life or leave and go entrepreneurial. And I did not want to go entrepreneurial. Like, my wife, she's like a hardcore entrepreneur. I am not. I don't know if you've seen the movie about St. Thomas More, Man for All Seasons. There's this. Oh, okay, you gotta watch that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. 1969, Man for All Seasons. It's the story of St. Thomas More. It's phenomenal. There's this one scene where he's talking to his wife, and he says, "Margaret," he points to himself, "this is not the stuff martyrs are made of." And in honor of that movie, I looked at my wife and I pointed to my own chest and said, "My wife, this is not the stuff that entrepreneurs are made of." Yeah, God was laughing too at that moment. And so I go into adoration. So for those who aren't Catholic, the idea of adoration is you just go into the church by yourself, or I was by myself at the time, doesn't have to be, in front of what we believe is the consecrated host, which is Jesus present, body and blood in the sacrament. And I went in there, I gave myself a good hour, and I took a piece of paper, and I also took my Bible and my daily reading journal. And on a piece of paper, I put a big line down the middle, and I say, corporate entrepreneur. And I start writing every reason to each one I can. And then I wrote all I could, probably about 20 minutes. I wrote everything I could think to write. And I literally looked up at our Lord and I said, "I'm giving this to you because I can't figure this mess out." And I just sat there for a while, and he started to say some things to me, not direct verbiage. I said, except from the coffee, I've almost never heard anything directly audibly. And I get the sense, I look down the list, everything about the corporate is about safety and security. And so I pull up my little Magnificat reading, and I flip to the day's reading. Consider the lilies, consider the birds, that I toil, but God takes care of them. And then I flip the next one. Do not place your things your trust in that which will rust, but rather than those things from like, dang Lord, this is not helping my cause here. I wanted to stay corporate here, and you are not backing me up on this plan. The old joke is, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Right. And I really prayed about it. I went home and I said, honey, this is not really what I want to do, but I think I'm called to leave this corporate world and go be an entrepreneur. And she was excited because she's like, hey, yay, business, yay, entrepreneur. And I was not. This is another good litmus test. Sometimes if you really want to be confident that if you think God's calling in the direction you really don't want to go, it's more likely that's real. And so
if you think God is calling you in a direction you don't want to go, it's more likely that's real.
Right. Like the old joke is like, you got a teenage boy sitting there on the students. God, if you want me to take this girl out, let a car drive by in the next 10 minutes that has paint. And if you don't want me to take it out, I want to see a 1957 Studebaker that has no front lights working and a spinny light on the top drive by. You're like, yeah, you're stacking the odds in your favor there, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so this one, I did not want to do it. And I did, and it was rough. So I should also point out that we had 3 of our 6 children at this point, and our last 3 boys were Irish triplets. They were each within 12 months of each other. This is how you get to 6 kids in 8 years. And not only were they super tight, my wife developed a relatively unusual medical condition, and she was required to be by her own. She didn't have a choice. She had to be in bed for 3 months for pregnancy number 4 and 6 months each for pregnancy number 5, number 6. She could not get out of bed, even to go to the bathroom. Like, it was screaming agony and take 20 minutes just to get to the bathroom. And we put her in the room right next to a bathroom.
Wow.
And so here I am running this fledgling company, caring for at first 3, then 4, then 5 children while my wife is in bed, all of it.
Wow. And it's the same business. It's the fencing company.
Still the fencing business. The only saving grace there, and this is how God works, is I could get up and get almost everything done for the fencing company with a time chunk. If I got up at about 4, I could go drive the 45 minutes where the plant was, start the crew, and then be back about the time the kids woke up. Then I come back in time to get the kids up, do breakfast, feed my wife, feed the kids, kind of get them going, do some light computer work. And then when I put all the kids down to nap, then I could drive and go see clients. And then I'd come home, take care of the kids for dinner, do the post-dinner stuff, do some more computer work at nighttime, go to bed and repeat. It was brutal.
Wow, man. And your wife, is she getting better at this point, or is this, how long did that season of time go on?
So I don't want to go into too many medical details, but the way that it worked out, within a day, she'd have some recovery. Within a week after giving birth, she was back to full functionality. And so we had some of our miscarriages take place even within that Irish triplet spacing. And those, when I mentioned earlier, sometimes feeling relief, like that was part of why I was feeling relief, is like, oh no, we're going back into this thing where my wife won't be able to be a functional human being for 6 months. Okay, we miscarried. Like, I'm sad for the loss of life, but at the same time, oh my gosh, thank you. We couldn't have handled that right now.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I know in the intro, we talked about 3 successful businesses. So do you eventually add to this, to your plate because it's not full enough?
Yeah, exactly. Because this is, oh my goodness, it's so funny looking backwards. So they weren't all at the same time. Praise the Lord. That would have not made it. So we were coming up to court. It's before COVID. It's a couple of years before COVID still, and we get the sense that it's time to sell this fencing business. And we've had the 6th child. And we finally found an NFP teacher who specialized in dealing with unusual cycles, which, by the way, is a thing. So if you are either for scientific reasons or for religious reasons attempting NFP, find somebody who really knows some details. Because the textbook cycles are one way, real cycles are not necessarily that way. That was one of the things going on for us.
Right.
And so we found out how to make that work for us. And by the grace of God, we found a buyer to buy the fencing company. And it's funny because then COVID hits. And he still wanted to buy it. I was like, okay, go for it. And so he paid us not a ton, but enough that we then kind of had this like moment where she and I came together in prayer and said, Lord, what do you want to do with our lives? Like, here we are, like, we could do whatever we want. We've got a decent chunk of cash. I've got all my degrees. I could go back, get a real job. Lord, what do you want us to do with our lives? And I really started praying. And the thing that came to me that I loved the most was I really loved helping people out. So when I was at Micron, I had the world's worst boss. I don't need to go into the details there, but I ran his group. He didn't know it, but I was in charge of his group. And several people that were in his group, I mentored them, and they valued it so much that even after I left Micron, they'd still be coming to me for multiple years after I left. Be like, hey, Michael, this is what's going on. I can use some advice. And we just talk. And I loved that. I loved the ability to reach into someone's life. Because at this point in time, I've gone through gobs of self-help stuff, gobs of therapy. I've written my forgiveness letter to my dad. I've made my formal forgiveness to my dad. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that's happened here in the background as I'm figuring out how to deal with these dragons living underneath me. And I thought, I really love helping men out. And so I looked at her, and she was like, yay, more business. I don't know if you've seen the Lego movie, the scene where Unity, she's like, business, 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 business. That is my wife right there. She's like, business, 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 business. And so we made this deal. She was going to start a company. I was going to start a company. And she started a company that works with Catholic women. And I started a company that works with Catholic men. And they're both life coaching companies, although they've diverged and they've gone in kind of slightly different directions, but they're still very similar in a lot of ways. And we decided that as part of this grand plan, we wanted to move. Boise was getting big. I mentioned I'm not a big city guy. And so we moved up to northern Idaho, middle of stinking nowhere. It sounds like you've driven through this area before.
Yes, I have.
Stunningly beautiful. I used to joke around that I love Northern Michigan so much I never find anyone else I love more until I moved to Idaho. Then I found somewhere I love more. But don't tell anyone because we have enough people here. We don't need to have more people
That's what I
moving.
hear. Yeah, it's
I believe
terrible.
the
It's a
address
terrible
is
place. Don't go.
a terrible place. The mosquitoes are so big that they can carry the horses off. But it's not true. Um, anyways, and we just really prayerfully discerned that God was saying, yeah, this is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to make your mark in the world. And so her business, I'll be blunt, her business has been more successful than mine. And I'm okay with that.
And so she's coaching Catholic women and you're coaching Catholic men exclusively.
Correct. Yep. I have a couple odd Protestants to come through. I love them too. Yeah. I have not accepted a client who doesn't at least hail Jesus.
Yeah. Yep. And you're coaching them in the areas of their, like I talked about earlier in your intro, around how to have successful relationships, successful marriages, how to interact and how to use faith in their work life and their relationships at work as well. Is that kind of what you're coaching on?
Absolutely. I think the core of it is, how do you be a strong man? How do you take charge of your life and choose the direction you want to go? How do you love your wife? Because most of us don't know how to do that. Like, you read in the Bible and you're like, well, what do those words mean? Because I look at this culture and it says, what does the word love mean? Well, I love these shoes. Okay, I'll treat my wife like I treat my shoes. That's not going to work very well.
Yep. And you're doing one-on-one coaching in that way?
Correct. I do almost entirely one-on-one. She has kind of moved on to many more group dynamics and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So what are you seeing in men? I'm curious, with the group of guys that you're working with, what are you seeing in terms of their relationships in general, how they're interacting at work as being, and how they're kind of manifesting being a masculine man? Well, what do you see?
So we live in this unfortunate age where we are now post-radical feminism. And let me first make an acknowledgement. There's a reason why the feminist message is so well received, because there's a very real history of men hurting women. And so I don't want to just throw feminism under the bus here entirely as being unfounded. It's true. Men have been jerks to women. However, the feminist message, the way it's been implemented in our society, has been by and large extremely destructive. Okay, I have to throw this quote out here. This might get me canceled somewhere. But I was just listening to Matt Fradd on Pints with Aquinas. He dropped this bomb that I loved. It goes like this: what pornography is to men, feminism is to women. And this blew me away because from pornography emasculates men. Literally, hormonally, your testosterone levels drop. You start to have a hormonal profile more like women. Feminism effeminates women. Pornography comes in and teaches you a false thing to pursue. Feminism comes in and teaches women a false thing to pursue. And so while I certainly don't want to diminish many of the good works that individual feminists have done, as a whole, the way the net effect of the improvement of this feminism on our culture has told women, you should be men, and told men, you should not be men. And so most men don't know how to be men. How do you be strong? Here's a great test. Can your wife get super upset with you, say a whole bunch of words, including your name, and have you stay calm and be a rock that loves her through it? Most men can't do that because they don't know how to be strong, not in an oppressive patriarchal sense, but in a self-mastery sense. Can I master myself to be strong and to react the way I want to react, regardless of the situation that's going down? And our wives are desperate for men who are strong men, who will take control and lead. Again, not in an abusive way, but in a loving way. And when you read Ephesians 5, when a man loves his wife the way Christ loves his church, it's natural that the wife would then, in response to that, want to submit herself to the man.
Right.
But that's not a popular idea in today's culture.
Yeah, it's because those two things are unhooked, right? So the reality is, I'm trying to think of where I recently heard this described, but this idea, it was Father Mike Schmitz talked about this idea that, husbands are called to love their wives the way Christ loved the church, like you just mentioned. Christ died for the church. He gave everything for the church, right? And then the next line is around wife submit to your husbands. Would it be something maybe reasonably expectant that a woman would be okay with submitting to a husband that is willing to die and give everything for that woman, right? I mean, if you unhook those two things, they don't make as much sense in their, by themselves. When you put them together, they sort of make a great sense, right? I mean, husbands are called to give themselves fully to the service and to the support, to the love of their wife, as Christ loved the church. And women are called then to submit to that love, right? They fit together beautifully.
I want to go one level a little bit deeper. How specifically did Christ love the church? In order for me to love the church the way Christ loved his church, it's reasonable to guess that my wife would have to treat me kind of like the church treated Christ. Because what Christ demonstrated his love for the church, he was in the midst of scorn, oppression, beatings, rejection, extremely improper treatment, like accusations
Unfair
left and right,
treatment.
all unfair, extremely unfair treatment, right? And in all of that, he loved the church. He stayed calm, he stayed loving, he stayed focused, and there were times that he became animated, but always towards the betterment of the church. And he held that line. And so then it's reasonable for me to think that if that's the injunction I'm under, my wife will do that to me. And that will enable me to be able to at least have the opportunity to love her the way Christ loved his church. And that's a scary thought for a lot of men. Yeah. And so my starting point with the discussion is, if you knew that was coming, are you strong enough to love her through that and to not be like, I'm done with this? Because there's a lot of ways men quit. Men can quit and stay, men can quit and run, but we can quit and stay and be like, that's it, I'm shutting it down. Like, I'm just too much. I'm retreating into my fortress of solitude here. Like, I'm not leaving. I'll be part of the kids. Like, I'll still say nice things to you here and there, but they're not engaging in the dynamic anymore. And I mentioned that my story with the young man named David and his parents. There's an extent of that was in his story, and I saw that. And then I also saw Paul's parents, and that dad, he was super type B. The mom was super type A. And I couldn't believe it because I'm super type A. You may have picked up on that. And I watched this dad. I'm like, dude, this man is a stronger man than I am, because he would be super quiet, but he would just hold his ground in a calm way. And his wife would go, blah, 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 blah. And he'd be like, this is the direction our family's going. I was like, whoa, I like that.
Yeah. 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 And some of the things you shared there just really bring back some imagery for me from the Bible around, when Christ is literally being crucified to the cross. You talk about the church, he loving the church and the church is not loving him back, right? So he's being crucified to the cross, and while he's being crucified, he's saying, Father, forgive them, they do not know what they do, right? And right. How powerful is that, right? And then to draw that analogy as a husband and say, even in the midst of chaos, when maybe the family or whatever is reacting in an emotional way, or like you said, kind of going off, to have the ability to be calm and to say, I'm going to be steadfast here. I'm going to be solid. I'm going to be emotionally grounded. I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to continue to lead forward. I think is challenging, right? It's very hard.
That's an understatement.
It requires strength. Because the reality is it's easy to love people when they're loving us back, right? It's right. Easy to love when we're being adored and being told we're the greatest thing. It's much more difficult when the opposite is true, right? When we feel like we're being treated unfairly. They don't understand the stress we're under. They don't understand this or that. And they're attacking or whatever it might be. To still be able to be strong in that is a true sign of a masculine disciple of Christ, right?
Amen. One of the things I tell men is, when your wife says words, even if your name is included in that list of words, she's attempting to convey a feeling to you. And all those words are about her and a feeling she's having. And you do not love her by pointing out her factual errors, the accusational nature of a literal interpretation of those words. You love her by trying your best to see through those words, to see the little girl who's hurting, who's having a big feeling, and by trying to connect to and serve her in that way. And that's hard. It takes a man of great strength to do it. But when we do, as men, do that, that is a game changer for how our wives see and respond to us.
Right on. Awesome, man. I want to be respectful of time, because I know we're getting toward the end of our time together. Couple thoughts or a couple questions that I wanted to ask you relative to your coaching, because I know helping men break from addictions is part of what you work with them on. What is your take on how that is done, right? How do you help men break from addictions?
So there's a couple different ways to go with this, but the number one thing I need to start with is, what is the gap you're trying to fill with that addiction? And understanding and finding that gap, acknowledging that gap, and surrendering that gap to our Lord for healing is, I think, the core part of the process I do with men. I think a lot of men try to escape addictions by brute force. They're like, oh, I'll try harder this time. That doesn't work, because you're battling against your own biology. And we men have basic needs of being loved, wanted, cared for. And if we aren't giving those, or even being open to those from the Lord, maybe because of self-judgment, maybe because of this self-belief, maybe whatever it is, we're not going to brute force our way around the pornography, around the alcohol, around whatever. The first thing I find is so helpful is doing the act of surrender of saying, this is what's going on. And it's like, when I was living in Oregon, there's this cool little thing called the Ape Caves. It was near Mount St. Helens. And it's these miles of lava tubes underneath, and it's dark in there. It is dark, pitch black. You're miles underground. And you'd go through the Ape Caves with some friends, and you have flashlights. Really cool. You have to go navigating these different ways. And I always imagined, and you're in there, there's a moment when you say, let's just all turn our flashlights off and see what we could do. And you turn your flashlight off. It's a horrific experience, because you start trying to move and it's just pitch black. You start bonking your face, bonking your body. You gouge your forehead out with some rock you didn't see coming. It sucks. And as a man, a lot of this stuff for most men is like the Ape Caves. They have no idea what's down there. We're totally disconnected as men, for our emotions, for our needs, for our wants. And so you need a coach. And my job is to be there. I'm just like, hey, look, I got a flashlight. Let's take a look as we walk through here and see what's down here. And a lot of it would be like, and then we get to some spot. We're like, okay, this is kind of a yucky spot. What do we do with the spot? And the normal male response is, I'm going to go bury that spot. I'm going to run away because I don't want to look at that spot anymore. And my invitation is always, let's take the spot and pray to our Lord. There are sometimes during coaching sessions, I would say, pause, we're just going to pray. And we'll just stop and pray. And I say, God's going to say something to you. God's going to say something to me. Let's compare notes. And it is amazing. It's not amazing if you have faith, but it's so confirmation. You asked earlier about science and faith. The number of times where he'll say, blah, 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 blah. And I'll say, and blah, blah, blah. He's like, oh, it all fits. I'm like, yeah, not every time. God's not you can't just put a quarter in God and get, an answer out of him.
Right.
But it's so common that is true.
Yeah. Awesome. As you start to think about your coaching practice, what's next for you as you start to look forward, Michael?
I would love to get a few more one-on-one clients, but I've got enough now that I'm starting to think. I have a fledgling group program I've started, and it's not fully available to everyone yet. Right now, I use the group program as if you've gone through coaching with me and watched a little bit of help and support going forward. But I'm looking at the number of men who really are struggling with masculine strength. And the truth is that I can't help all of them. So if we're going to make some way to scale that up to reach more, like just the other day, where was I at? I was traveling somewhere. I was in Boise traveling because visiting some godparents, and I had a great conversation with a rando guy after mass, and it was maybe only 2 or 3 minutes. But I was like, dude, this guy needs something. I don't have something to give him. So I'd love something that I just give him, be like, here's something that'll get you started.
Yep. And do you currently write a blog or anything like that for kind of broader consumption by potential clients or your clients themselves?
So I'm big into audio. I love talking. You may have picked up on that. And I have a podcast. I've got 170 some episodes in the podcast right now. And I'm also, guys, not very good with names, sciencey type again. And so I just go with very simple names. Like, you got a really cool name. Like, your name's awesome. My name's so simple. Actually, I don't come up with this kind of awesome names. My name's just Catholic Life Coach for Men, because I'm a Catholic and I do life coaching for men. So that's the name of the podcast, the name of the website. It's all there together.
Right on. Okay. And so is that how people would connect with you if they're looking to connect? Just reach out to, say the name of the website
absolutely.
again.
Catholic Life Coach for Men. Without the .com is my podcast. With the .com is my website. There's, contact form there. And I have an open invitation that any Christian man, I don't work with women, but any Christian man who would like to, I will give you a free hour. We sign up, we talk for an hour. We talk about what coaching may or may not do for your life and where your life's at, where it's going.
Fantastic. Michael, it's been a great conversation. We went in a lot of directions, and we went into some areas that I had no really anticipation that we were going to, but I'm so glad that we did. Great conversation, and really enjoyed connecting with you, man. So thank you for taking time.
You as well, Eric. This has been a delight. It is really fun talking to you, and I hope that your audience has been blessed by the sharing of my story, and that they will make a better story than mine for their own children.
Right on. Amen to that. Thank you again, Michael. And to our audience, thank you for taking time from your busy day to listen to the show. Always appreciate that you do that, humbled that you do that. If you would share the program with a friend, write a review, give us a rating, all those things help us reach a broader audience. Until next time, friends, I'm Eric Sardina. You've been listening to the Return to Authenticity podcast, and bye for now.